Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Eczema Podcast. I am so happy to have you guys here. And today I have a great guest. Her name is Jennifer Brand. She's a clinical nutritionist. She specializes in working with kids who have skin conditions, including eczema and gut conditions and allergies. So she's going to be a great guest on the show today who's going to bring a lot of expertise and knowledge as well. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And I would love to know, maybe you can share with our audience how you got into all of this and how you started with all of this and working with kids as well.
Sure. So, I find that so many of us in functional medicine and, as nutritionists, et cetera, we've experienced our own health challenges, which we've had to take matters into our own hands to find solutions for. My personal story is a long one, so I'm not going to go into details, but, I'll give you a summary. As a child, I struggled with feeling different. I have a congenital defect, and I was also frequently ill with things like strep throat and ear infections, which of course came along with just all sorts of antibiotics, as you can imagine. As a teen, I experienced some significant physical and emotional traumas. I developed severe IBS, and then over the years, my health continued to deteriorate. And like so many of us, I started using diet restrictions to manage my symptoms. Over time, my diet restriction became a coping mechanism for me because I felt like everything was out of control. I ended up nearly hospitalized for anorexia. And, through all of this, the symptoms that I was trying to manage with my diet continued to get worse. And, this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about spreading the word that, food isn't the root cause of the problem, and continuing to blame food can cause more harm than good. We know our bodies run off of nutrients from foods we eat. They're our fuel. And if they're missing, imbalances develop and symptoms and health problems follow. And in order to resolve my health problems, I've had to address, my gut health, expand my diet to nourish my body. And the hardest part was really to deal with the emotional aspects of my past. Another significant motivator for me to do what I do is my father. He was diagnosed with psoriasis as a child, and by the time he was 30, he developed psoriatic arthritis. He's in his 70s now, and he's taken a conventional medicine approach, and he just isn't really open to the functional approach to things. He doesn't quite understand how nutrition and lifestyle can play such an important role in his overall health. So he's just very deeply rooted in his current medical model of addressing his disease in a certain way. And that's been very challenging for me to watch, especially, given what I do and, working with people with psoriasis, where we can get such improvement and such resolution of these problems with diet, with lifestyle, with addressing gut health and what have you. So also my brother has psoriasis. My mom has vitiligo. So there's skin things all around me. So I became very passionate about helping people with skin conditions. And, and I feel too, like nobody should have to go through this struggle, no matter what your symptoms and health problems are, if it's not getting that resolution, from conventional means. And certainly babies shouldn't have to go through this. Like, they shouldn't have to spend their first year suffering. And it just breaks my heart because so many parents and so many folks in general just kind of give up. And it's, we're told that it's just something you're going to have to learn with. And to me, that's not really an acceptable answer. The symptoms that we have, including skin rashes, food allergies, food sensitivities, gut problems, these are the body's cry for help that something's wrong. And, we can figure out what that is, we can address it, and we can bring back balance to the body to help it heal. So that's just why I'm passionate about doing all of this. So some personal aspects, and, just also kind of going through my own stuff and feeling alone and like there was nobody there to hold my hand. So it's really important to me to do that with my clients, to give people the support that they need to get through this, to have that coaching aspect involved, because I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle. And, certainly when we're dealing with, parents with these little ones who are struggling, that's a very hard position to be in as a parent. So I just want to be there to support folks.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I totally agree with you. It can be so tough especially as a child, to go through it and also to feel really alone. It can definitely be very, I remember I felt that way personally. And I felt that no one else in the world was going through it. I didn't know anyone else going through it, and I felt really alone. And I think it's wonderful that you're working with kids and just being able to help kids as well. So maybe we'll get into the juicy parts of the podcast. And yeah, let's talk about how to treat kids and the root causes and the nitty gritty of it all.
Sure. Well, I'll start with, I talk in my practice about going back to the basics and addressing the foundation. And so I'll talk about what this means as it applies to skin rashes like eczema. But what I have found in my clinical practice that there are three foundational aspects to health that really need to be in place for all else to work the way that it's supposed to, including what's happening with our skin. And number one, we really need to make sure that our bodies have the fuel they need to do everything that they're supposed to do, including building and repairing healthy skin. So healthy skin requires a lot of different nutrients that come from foods we eat. So this means that we need to eat rather than restrict. And, I've repeatedly seen clients' skin rashes get worse the more restrictive their diets become. And I find that this is extremely problematic in children because they're growing and developing, so we don't want children to be on a restricted diet where we can avoid that. I do recommend keeping out some of the common eczema triggers, so we're talking about processed junk food, sugary foods, gluten, dairy, eggs are typically the most common triggers that I see, especially with eczema. And, whether there are identified IgE reactions to them or not, these are trigger foods for skin rashes. And, something I like to point out too is that just because somebody doesn't have an identified allergy doesn't mean that the food won't cause reaction. So I see that with a lot of folks too. They go to the doctor, get their allergy test done. Oh, well, I'm not allergic to gluten, so I can eat it. So things like that I think are important to understand. And so I think, that number one aspect is making sure that the nutrients are getting in so that we have the fuel that we need. And number two, we need to see what's happening in the gut. Health begins in the gut. It's where 80% of our immune system is located. And it also plays a huge role in detoxification. And these are important things for skin health. So I'll talk about a little bit about the gut and why this is so important. So if we have gut problems, we can't digest and absorb nutrients from the foods that we do eat. So this means that we could be eating everything that we're supposed to. We could have the perfect diet, but it's not going to matter much because you're not going to be able to use those nutrients because your gut can't process them. Also, 80% of the immune system is a lot of the immune system, and this is in the gut. So this means if there are gut problems, that it can significantly impact how the body reacts to potentially triggering substances, whether that is food or environmental or what have you. And also, if there are gut problems, there are often problems with detoxification. So in order for detox to function the way it's supposed to, we've got to have good gut health. So there's something called the gut-skin axis, and I love the research. So there's actual epidemiological evidence that shows a clear association between gut problems and skin conditions. And this happens when we have increased gut permeability, which we know as leaky gut. So when there are problems in the gut, so we're talking about gut dysbiosis, which is abnormal flora. So we can have overgrowths of good bugs, undergrowths of good bugs. We can have infections, things that aren't supposed to be in there, all kinds of things happening that shouldn't be. We get inflammation in the gut. This causes the lining of the gut to get permeable or leaky, and then toxins can get out of the gastrointestinal tract into the bloodstream. Once they're in the bloodstream, they trigger all sorts of health problems, including skin conditions, because they trigger the immune system to respond. The immune system sees these things as foreign, and it's like, hey, you're not supposed to be here. So it mounts a response. And over time, that affects different people differently, but it can result in allergic conditions like your eczema, like your food allergies, and what have you. And also, so this gut hyperpermeability situation is how food sensitivities develop in the first place. And so, it's those food particles are getting into the bloodstream. The body is mounting an immune response and it's attacking. And so we get these symptoms. And so, this is why I like to talk to people too. It's like if you have a lot of different food sensitivities, which I do see in my clinical practice and a lot of folks that do struggle with skin rashes, those food sensitivities are a result of gut problems. So that's why it's important to take a look and see what's happening in the gut. And so all of this gut stuff can actually be happening without any gut symptoms at all. And I see that kind of frequently too. So, it's interesting how everybody's affected differently. Like my problems are gut related. So, I have all of this going on and I have gut symptoms. I have a lot of clients that have different kinds of skin rashes. They have no gut symptoms at all. Yet when we check the gut to see what's happening in there, all sorts of imbalances. And it always amazes me how they don't have any gut symptoms at all with everything that's going on in there. And then when we start to rebalance things, the skin improves as well. Another factor that I find important to address is chronic stress. So chronic stress can affect the body in a variety of ways, and it is a trigger for many people with skin rashes, and it comes from different sources. So, we tend to think of stress as, relationship stress, or I'm stressed out about work, my finances, certainly, everything that's going on in the world right now, it's a stressful situation. So, we do have that sort of emotional, personal stress. But medications that we use can cause stress on the body. Environmental pollutants, pesticides, processed foods, other toxic exposures, or even things like restricted diets, over-exercising, gut problems, skin rashes themselves. All of these types of stress actually wreck the skin barrier. So they cause chronic stress in the body, which changes how our stress response and some of our hormonal responses work. And it actually wrecks your skin barrier, changes the way the immune system functions, and can lead to allergic conditions like eczema, like food allergies, like environmental allergies. So those are the aspects that I focus on in my practice. So we've got, make sure the right nutrients, make sure the right nutrients are getting in, see if the gut's working, see what's happening in there, and manage situations of chronic stress.
That's great. So are you a fan of doing the food allergy tests or the food sensitivity tests that some practitioners also recommend?
I am generally not, and I will tell you why. So as I mentioned, food sensitivities are not the root cause of the problem. They can be a trigger for symptoms, absolutely. But when we have a lot of food sensitivities, it points to a situation of gut hyperpermeability or leaky gut. So what I find is that when people do these food sensitivity tests, they end up on these restricted diets. And so typically once you take, the top offending foods out of the diet, people will feel better for a little while, but then symptoms tend to come back. And so then they take another set of foods out of the diet, and then symptoms come back after a little while. So the diet is getting smaller and smaller, and the symptoms are maybe getting better temporarily, but then they tend to come back. And what's missing is why we have the food sensitivities in the first place, which is because of the gut hyperpermeability and the gut dysbiosis. So and I do see a lot of clients that have, done the food sensitivity testing, so they bring me those results. I do think it can be helpful to take out the highly reactive or the, severe reactive foods while we're working on addressing the root cause, while we're taking a look at the gut. But beyond that, the diet gets more and more restrictive, and it doesn't resolve the root cause of the problem. In my practice, I very rarely recommend food sensitivity testing unless somebody comes to me with it already. And that's because, people's budgets are limited and these tests can get expensive. And so I, recommend to people that, rather than, okay, we know you have food sensitivities because you're reacting to certain foods. You've identified, histamines. Okay, you've taken those out. You feel better. Dairy. Okay, you've taken that out. There's been a little help. So, we can get to that endpoint of those food sensitivities really by undertaking an elimination diet versus spending the money on a food sensitivity test. I prefer to have people, save their resources for a stool test, for example.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I would love to know the other tests that you recommend as well, because you're mentioning that you check their gut health as well. So what other tests or even when someone first comes to you, what is your first approach to treating them? And do you always recommend a test, or do you just look at their intake form and then start with a treatment plan there?
That's a good question. So it depends. Most of the people that come to me have tried everything. And literally, I mean, everything. They've been on restrictive diets for years. A lot of these moms have, infants that are being breastfed, exclusively breastfed. They're flaring, mom has her own health issues. Mom's diet's getting more and more restrictive, nothing's improving. So again, it kind of depends. So most of the time when people come to me, they've really tried all of the food stuff. They've tried, everything topical, everything in their house is natural, non-toxic, like they've done literally everything and they still have problems. So in cases like that, I absolutely recommend, okay, stop taking foods out of your diet, keep those main triggers out, like processed foods, gluten, dairy, sugary foods, eggs, again, common trigger. So keep those out. Other than that, if you have foods where, you eat something and yes, you can tell there's a reaction, keep that out for now. And then we focus on going to the gut and taking a look at that and what's happening in there. And we do that with a comprehensive digestive stool test, which is very different than what you get at your conventional doctor's office. So a comprehensive digestive stool test looks at the makeup of your commensal bacteria. So just all the stuff that lives in there that's supposed to be there. So, and all the beneficial stuff. So are there levels that are too high? Are there levels that are too low? In either way, in either case, that has an impact on our overall health and can trigger skin rashes, among other health issues. Are there parasites in there? Is there an overgrowth of yeast or candida? Viruses, for example, we can check for that as well. We also get a sense on this test if there are reactions to gluten. There's anti-gliadin antibody testing in some of these tests. The one that I use in particular does have that. There are markers for how the immune function of the gut. So remember, 80% of the immune system is located in the gut microbiome. So we can see if the immune system of the gut is hyperstimulated, in which case it's like, okay, what is hyperstimulating this? It could be an overgrowth of gut bugs or something happening in the gut. It could be food allergies. So if I do see something like hyperstimulated in the gut with the immune function markers, then I might start looking a little bit deeper into food stuff. Maybe it just depends with what else is going on. We also get a sense of digestion and absorption in these tests, which also plays a huge role in what happens with our skin. So there's a lot to look for in this type of stool test. So again, very different than what you get at your conventional doctor. And it makes things very actionable for, what we need to do next to resolve those imbalances that are happening in there. And on the other hand, on occasion, I will get somebody that comes to me that hasn't made any diet changes. It's the little one, let's say it's, somebody who's 5 or, a teenager or something. And they're, pizza, mac and cheese, not quite the healthiest type of diet. Then we do start with diet, and at that point it's like, okay, let's back up and go back to basics. Let's talk about what kind of nutrients your body needs to function. What can we add in? I like to focus it on what are we going to add in versus what are we going to take away, especially when we're working with little ones. So I would say for the most part, and, just based on the clients that do come to see me, we do kind of start more in depth with a stool test versus just the diet. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And do you ever get any hesitation from moms who, when you do offer to do the stool test, do they ever say that it's pricey or that they're hesitant or skeptical to go down that route?
Not really. I would say, by the time people find me, I think that they are looking for a functional medicine approach. They're looking for a different approach. They've tried so many other things. They're at the end of the rope. And so they just go for it. They really just go for it. And I'm always pretty impressed with these moms, with these parents. They're like, no, we've tried everything. This isn't working. Let's just go. So there, I do see that a lot. I do include the stool test in, some of my programs and services. So I pay for that for folks depending on, what we do together. But generally people are pretty much ready to go.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm going to get a lot of questions, but how much can someone expect to pay for the test if they do go ahead with it?
So the test, on average, I would say it's about $350.
And that's around average for other tests as well. So I'm actually not too surprised by that amount.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's expensive, of course, but it's not, overly ridiculous. I've seen some things out there like $700, $800, and that just, my head explodes because I would never even do that. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but generally the stool test, the one that I use in particular is $359. That's the cash pay price if people pay cash. Some others out there I've seen for like $375. I'd say on average, it's like, between $300 to $400 is what I think people can expect to pay for that kind of test. And, the thing is, it is so beyond worth it. There's some of those other direct to consumer tests out there that they advertise for. I won't say their names. But the ones that you can just kind of order yourself for, $99, $199. I have seen the results of those, and they're not actionable for this type of work at all. I think that they're interesting. It can provide interesting information, but it does not give us the detail that we need in order to create a protocol around what's happening in order to address, what's happening on the outside with the skin. And again, it's like we need to see what's happening in there with the gut bugs, like what's the makeup of them. We need to rebalance that most likely. We need to get rid of things that aren't supposed to be in there at all. We need to make sure that somebody is digesting and absorbing. And this test gives us results. It gives us the markers so we can see if they're doing that. And then again, that immune function of the gut. These are all areas for intervention. So when we see something's off, we address things with, diet and lifestyle where we can. But at this stage, we are talking about supplements as well. And it's really important to have as much detail as possible, because the more detail we have, and that's what you get with a comprehensive digestive stool test. So the more detail you have, the better the interventions, the better the protocol will be, the more customized the protocol will be for that particular person, which is really important in getting resolution to what's happening on the skin.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the other practitioner that I interviewed, she mentions that she uses the Dr. DNA test. Is yours anything similar to that?
Is that the doctor's data?
It might be doctor's data. Can't remember the exact name.
Okay, there's a doctor's data. It's similar to that. Yeah, I like GI Map, which is from Diagnostic Solutions.
That one is the gold standard.
I've been using that one for a while now. Actually, this will be interesting. Your listeners might find this tidbit interesting. I'll tell you why I started using that one. So I was using, there's a test that Genova has. It's called GIFX. Fantastic test. That had been my go-to for a long time. A few years ago, when I started seeing really little ones, so like under 2 years old, at the time, Genova wasn't running the tests on little ones under 2 years old. The reason for that is that an infant gut microbiome is different than an adult gut microbiome. And at about 2 years of age, the infant gut microbiome becomes more mature. Before that, the way you look at the stool test, the result is very different than how you'd interpret it as an adult. And the results that come back, they're not, like, the research doesn't really exist in terms of, reference ranges. So the reference ranges that we're seeing on those tests are for 2 years and up. So you have to really understand those differences in what happens in an infant gut microbiome. So the reason why I ended up going to GI Map at that time is because they would run it under 2 years old. So I just started using GI Map because I was seeing so many little ones. And since then, I know that, Genova, the GIFX now will do it, under 2 years old. But I just got used to using GI Map, and I find the results super actionable, and the detail is just very, very actionable. So that's why I use that one now.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And one thing I love to ask is, what types of patterns do you notice in the test? I know that everyone is going to have a different result, but is there any common pattern that you do tend to see in more little kids than others?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I'm going to say no. And that's the interesting thing, because I'm trying to, pull together my own research, my own patterns, because again, a lot of this doesn't really exist for little ones. I would say that it really is all over the place. So let's say, we have two little ones, both have eczema, both around the same age. I don't know, both, exclusively breastfed. Let's say like everything appears the same, right? And then we look at the gut. One can have high levels of everything, overgrowth of everything, parasites, H. pylori, C. diff infection, like you name it. And another one can have low levels of good gut bugs, low levels of, gut immunity, problems with digestion and absorption, fat in the stool. Like it is so different. And so that is one of the things that I find really fascinating. It's that there are such differences in these tests between people who seem to have similar symptoms. What's happening inside is very different, but it's interesting how those differences result in the same type of effect, which is the gut hyperpermeability, the problems with getting the nutrients that we need so that our bodies can use them, the stress that all of this causes on the body, and then what those foundational factors that I had talked about. So it creates the situation where these factors end up creating systemic inflammation, which is inflammation throughout the body, which then triggers the immune system to go haywire. And an immune system that's dysfunctional, results in these allergic conditions like eczema, like food allergies and other allergies, and even asthma, these atopic conditions. So yeah, and I'm still looking for some of those patterns, and I have not found them yet.
That's so interesting. This is why I love interviewing different practitioners, because everyone has something different that they learn from their practice and different ways of treating their patients as well. And I just love hearing, because even though I interviewed another integrative pediatrician on, her ways of treating, there's always like slight differences. So it's always great to learn from different people and how they're treating their patients as well. And it's great that, you're always able to learn different things from the tests that you're doing as well.
Thanks for listening to the Eczema Podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass it along to your friends. Visit eczema-conquerors.com for more articles and tips. Thanks for listening.